Hello there, Smeg Heads, it's Kid Bowman again. I'm going to continue reading Red Dwarf backwards by original co-creator Rob Grant. Let's continue reading on page 57 on chapter 10 of Reversing the Verse. I hope you Smeg Heads enjoyed it so far. So, shall I begin reading to you? Crichton knelt and placed his fingertips on the hillbilly's neck. There was no pulse. The body was still fairly warm. Fresh blood was still oozing around the terrible chest wound. He eased on his hunches and tried to think. How could the hermit possibly be dead? Time was running backwards, and they'd already seen the man alive later that morning. Crichton accessed the unshooting incident in his file storage and selected a still frame of Hillbilly. He looked down at the dead man and compared the two faces. It wasn't the same man. He dressed the same. His features were extremely similar, but not exactly the same, undoubtedly. The corpse was a close blood relative to the hermit who had shot at them. The preceding events began to tumble into place. That's why the mountain man had been weeping in the clearing. He had discovered his brother's corpse. He had been beating the bushes, looking for some kind of clue to the perpetrator of a crime. Then he had spotted Lister and chased them to the car. He had assumed they were killers. This was a crime for which Lister had been arrested, and since Lister could have killed the man, that meant the real murderer was somewhere close by. Suddenly, Crichton was aware of someone behind him. There had been no footsteps, just a sight of a rustle breathing. Crichton wheeled round, his hands flattened and elbows cocked in what he hoped would look like a threatening karate chop posed to his attacker. It was Wimmer. His features were puffed with rage, his fury deflated when he registered Crichton's fear and distress. His eyes tracked down the pickaxe handle down to the corpse. Then he back up to Crichton. Dead? He asked simply. I'm afraid so. It is not a hermit. Who is chasing us? I think it's probably his brother or his cousin. Probably both. Women knelt beside him. Probably his uncle and his father too. Crichton was affronted. Revolution and human death was deep in the core of his programming, and witnessing it his first hand always disturbed him hugely, especially when the death was unnatural and violent. He turned his face to Wimmer. Do you really think it is appropriate to jest at the expense of the dead? Wimmer shrugged. He won't be dead long. Of course, Crichton cursed his own stupidity. Soon, probably in a matter of minutes, the corpse would come to life. All they had to do was conceal themselves in the bushes and wait until the murderer showed up. Suddenly, the corpse's eyes blinked open. Suddenly, Crichton so violently, he lost his balance again and tumbled onto his back. The corpse opened his mouth and let out the terrible death rattle. Crichton scrambled to his feet. For God's sake, Wimmer yelled, turn your smegging light on. Crichton flicked on his chest light. The beam hit the animating corpse It gurgled as the thick dribble of the bubbling blood trickled up his cheek and into his mouth. Dizzy with horror, Crichton was vaguely aware that Wimmer was talking to him. He turned and said, "What's your hands?" Wimmer was saying. He held his hands in the light. The goo was that covered them with blood. Crichton was beginning to loosen it. He felt like a tsunami was roaring through his head. The stalk of beam from his chest, light humiliating his body, shaking hands fell on the corpse beyond a registered movement. With a low, awful moan, the corpse began to writhe. Its body started shuddering violently. Then it arched his back stiffly and screamed. It thumped back down and began beating the ground with his fists. It screamed again in pain and fury and grasped the pickaxe handle. It started looking from side to side, hands desperately clawing the handle of the instrument of death. Wimmer was screaming, "Do something!" and Crichton gathered forward, half blind with panic. He grasped the pickaxe. The corpse was looking up at him with an expression that looked like astonishment. Crichton tugged at the handle. There was a wet cracking sound in the man's chest, but the pickaxe remained locked there. Crichton summoned all his strength and pulled again, and the corpse was tugged to his feet, arms flailing and screaming and yelling insanely. And still the pickaxe was wedged in his chest, and then Crichton held on to the handle, lost his sanity, gargling out of his ears, and as he danced to a macabre and waltzed with a dying man in the airy glow of his own chest light. Crichton was trying to yank the pickaxe loose, but Mountain Man was holding it in his own chest with phenomenal, adrenaline strength. Then, suddenly, he let go, and the gruesome, crunching gloop, Crichton jerked the pickaxe free. While he was starting astonished at the Billy Hill's shirt front, the man lunged at the pickaxe still raised over Crichton's head. So in shock, Crichton tussled with him for a second or two and then let go. The reverse impetus of the money for flew him to the ground and sent him rolling side over side towards the bushes. For the moment, the hillbilly held the pickaxe over his head and then swung it down towards the tumbling Crichton, but missed and raised it again. Crichton rolled over the spot where the blade had struck and stopped rolling. He jumped to his feet and faced the mountain man who was brushing the pickaxe, one hand on the handle, the other halfway along the shaft. He was snoring and murmuring vicious threats. Crichton was hurt and confused. He had just brought this man back from the dead. Why was the bent on him hurting him? The hillbilly heaved the pickaxe onto one hand and swung it sideways, but he was out of range, and the blade whistled past Crichton's granule socket. Crichton stumbled backwards towards the still, not knowing what to do or say. He looked around for Wimmer, but he was nowhere in sight. And then, as Crichton passed the still, it occurred to him to switch off his chest light. Now the clearing was only irradiated by gentle blue glow of a flame from a still. The mountain man lurched dangerously at his retreating form, and then swam round and buried a pickaxe in the ground. Facing away from Crichton, he backed up towards the still, looked at Crichton once over his shoulder, and promptly proceeded to ignore him. Crichton backed up out of the clearing stealthily and collapsed onto his haunches in the shelter of the nearest bush. After a few minutes, his sanity returned, and Wimmer crept along after it. Crichton was going to ask him where he had got to, but it would be a pointless question. As soon as Wimmer had seen the fight start, he had performed his famous impression of a whippet, and with a sphincter full of dynamite. Crichton had long since ceased to wonder where the man who was already dead could be such a relentless coward. Sorry about that, Wimmer growled, close enough to whisper. Thought I spotted the other one trying to outflank you. So I dashed off to cover your rear and prepared for the bushes. The hillbilly was quietly tending still. What now? Now, Crichton had lost track of time. He checked his internal chronometer, almost 2:15. We'd better get back to StarBug, see if the others are there. If Lister and the car had managed to unearth the other two engines intact, it might be enough to get them airborne. Wimmer nodded and turned towards the ridge. Crichton rose to follow him, then stopped in mid-crutch. A terrible thought had struck him. He had been reversing the incident in his mind in order to explain to the others why had it actually happened and why had been delayed. When he realized the unthinkable truth, he had just violated his most sacred directive. He had killed a human being in the cold blood. Well, that's finished on page 62 on chapter 11. Okay, so I'll see you Smeg Heads later, and I'll continue of the 5th part of Red Dwarf backwards, and see you next time, and I'll be right back.